San Agustin Flats, New Mexico Territory, 883. The wind cut like iron filings. I was out checking the north fence, where the prairie runs wide and the posts lean like old men with secrets. The sky had that tin taste before a storm, and the wire sang a tired note each time I plucked it, same as a guitar with only one string that refused to break or sing right. My hands were busy, my mind empty. That was the bargain I made with the land most days. Then I saw something that didn't belong to the land. At first it read like a bird snagged in cottonwood limbs, some black-winged thing twisting on a line. But the shape fought the wind, and the wind fought back, and the swing of it told a human story. I stopped the bay gelding. The leather creaked. Breath smoked out of his nostrils and scattered thin in the cold. What I'd taken for a bird was a body, small and wiry, hung upside down from a low fork of the cottonwood, set all alone in the grass like a gallows that had wandered off and lost its crowd. The world narrowed to sound. The wire's faint whine, the flap of a torn skirt, a muffled rasp that might have been prayer or cussing. I couldn't judge. I slid from the saddle, my boots sinking in the brittle tufts, and the smell came first. Dust, horse, a ribbon of blood iron turning sweet in the Sunday. 2 rawhide thongs bit into ankle bones gone bluish, a strip of cloth tied hard across the mouth, arms bound behind. Whoever did it knew their knots. I went slow. My eyes did the measuring, but it was my skin that felt the distance, how the air grew colder 3 paces out, how the hush deepened until even the grass forgot to make a sound. The wind quit, as if the land itself held its breath to see if I would move or keep my saddle clean and my conscience cleaner. Her hair had come loose, dark as creek water under moon. Dust stuck to it in a fine grit. The face was turned half toward me, half toward nothing. Eyes open, black with the kind of shine a man gets only when he's beaten but not yet broken. Apache mescalero by the beadwork, if my guessing was worth spit. The question rose up plain as a signboard. What kind of man are you, Elias Boone? There are times a man earns or forfeits his own name in a single minute. This was one of mine. I looked left, right. No riders, no smoke from cook fires, not even vulture shadow, which told me something worse. Whoever strung her here either watched from far enough to enjoy it, or they meant me to find her and hang myself with the same rope by way of blame. Harlan Pike liked messages written in pain. He'd claim it was law. Most days in this country, law comes with a private brand. I stepped under the cottonwood spread. The bark peeled like old paint. My knife came free, easy bone handle. Edge I kept for cutting feed bags and trouble. I spoke soft, the way you do with a spooked colt. I'm here. I won't hurt you. Her eyes didn't change, but the body stilled a fraction, like a man at the end of a prayer who hasn't said amen yet. I took the gag first, easing the knot. She coughed once dry, mean. A word came out hoarse, one I knew from the mountains, water. I tipped the canteen to her lips and counted slow so she wouldn't drown on mercy. Then I cut one thong and caught her weight with my shoulder. She was warm and trembling, not from fear but from blood running wrong. I lowered her to the grass and took the strain on my legs. She hissed air through her teeth and locked her jaw like a soldier holding ground. The voice in my head, the one that sounds like my father, said, "Easy, son. Don't make it worse." So I went easy. For a long beat, the world was just the 2 of us, and the cottonwood ticking like a clock. The rest of the country could have gone to war or to wedding, and I wouldn't have known. I'll tell you something I don't tell often. That first minute had the weight of a year. You live inside it. You hear all the old noises you've tried to ride away from. A woman crying behind a door you never opened. A boy's breath going shallow at Shiloh while you cursed your own steady hands for not knowing what to do with a bleeding life. The land keeps such things in its pockets. Every so often it pulls one out and asks if you're ready to pay. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway, to keep more Wild West love stories coming. Her ankles were raw to the bone. I wrapped them with strips torn from my undershirt, and she watched me like a hawk watches a snake. No trust, no hate, just the calculation of a soul that has been left alone too long to believe in help without a bill. When I reached for her wrists, she flinched and bit back a sound. "Name?" I asked. Her mouth worked, and the word came with grit in it. "Taya. I'm Elias. Elias Boone," she said, not asking. It wasn't surprise. It was assessment, like naming the caliber by sound alone. Mescalero know the names of men who either bring food or fire. "You know who left you like that?" I said. She stared past me at the empty horizon, where the grass turns to pale silk and the day falls off its edge. "Men who talk of clean land," she said. "They hang the truth until it stops kicking." Pike's phrase, right down to the shine. Clean land. A bad joke that made men feel good about their hands. I lifted her to sitting and heard the breath catch sharp. "Easy," I said. "We'll take it an inch at a time." "Your voice is heavy," she murmured, "like a storm that doesn't want to come." "Storms don't want anything," I said. "They just are." Men too," she answered, and then her eyes closed for a moment, as if that small piece of talking taxed the last of her pride. I got her onto my horse, up across the saddle with my coat under her to soften the rub, and started walking the gelding toward the line shack I kept by the arroyo, a place with a roof that didn't leak much, and a door that shut all the way if you put your shoulder to it. The fence could wait. A woman hanging from a tree can't. The flats took us in and swallowed our sound. I kept scanning sky, ground, low spots where riflemen like to nap until a man's conscience puts him in range. No dust plumes. Still, I felt watched, the way a sinner feels watched by the verse he can't forget. We made the shack before the sun crawled to its red. I laid her on a pallet of old horse blankets and lit the stove with cedar slivers. The room warmed quick, busy with fire logic. I heated water, reached for the small pouch the doc at Needle Rock sold me for bruises and sprains. She smelled the willow bark before I opened it and nodded with a ghost of a smile that didn't ask permission from her pain. "You know plants," I said. "My mother taught me to listen to what grows," she said. "Yours?" "War taught me. After that I let the land keep teaching. I worked the salve in ribs, ankles, the cruel grooves the thongs had left. When I got too close to a tender place, she whispered, not unkind, 'Easy, cowboy.' I found myself breathing to her measure, as if her pain set the metronome for my hands. "Why help me?" she asked at last, voice steady enough to be a blade. "Because this is my country too," I said. "And I don't fancy living in a place where a person is just a warning sign for other folks." "That is not why," she said, and it wasn't accusation so much as bone certainty. I didn't answer. I'm not good at talk that asks for blood. Outside, the wind came back like a thought you try not to think. I kept my hat brim low and the fire low, and I listened. A coyote marked distance. Cottonwood leaves clicked. Once, far off, a horse snorted the way a sentry does when the night tries to put him to sleep. I put out the stove light, and we shared the kind of dark you can lean on. She slept the sleep of bodies that can't afford dreams. I sat with my back to the door, and my rifle across my knees, and let the minutes come like cattle through a gate one at a time, slow enough to count, fast enough to lose. Toward midnight, when the heat dies and the truth comes forward, I thought of Harlan Pike. He likes his lessons public. He likes his dirt clean and his books balanced in blood. If he'd strung Taya where I'd find her, he meant to make a story of me too. Lone hand takes in Apache woman. Fence goes mysteriously cut. Cattle go missing. And the town decides the shape of guilt before breakfast. You don't need a preacher to light that sermon. I checked her bandages. The swelling at her ankles had stopped trying to climb her legs. Her breathing settled into the rhythm of work left for another day. Up close, she looked not like a warning nor like an answer, just a person sized to fit a life she hadn't been allowed to live. The kind of sight that takes a man's past and empties it out on the floor so he can see what's worth keeping. When dawn spoke pale against the seam of the door, I knew what the day would ask. Ride her to her people and earn a rifle ball for your manners? Ride her into town and earn a rope for both? Or keep her here, quiet, and let Pike write the ending while decent folks choose not to notice? A man can lie to anyone he pleases, but not to the sun at first light. I poured coffee so strong it argued back and waited for her eyes to find me. She did not ask where she was. "Elias Boone," she said again, more like a diagnosis than a greeting. The one who does not go to church and still prays when he fixes a fence. Who told you that? The way you touch wire, she said. You hate breaking things. Thought I hid that pretty well, I said. And we both almost smiled. Almost. The wind carried a smell, then smoke too straight to be stove smoke. A thin column beyond the cottonwood line, east by the old sheep dip. My back knew it before my eyes. Pike's boys, making another message. Can you ride? I asked. She looked at the door as if it held a ruin and a rescue at once. If I cannot, I will learn again today. Then we move before the day does. I cinched the bay, rigged a sling so her ankles wouldn't take the hammering, and we stepped out into a light that made the prairie look like it had been polished for judgment. The cottonwood stood quiet now, a plain tree with nothing to confess. The rope still hung there, a line between what I'd been and what I might yet be. We left it swinging. We kept low along the arroyo, letting the cutbank hide our shadows. The smoke rose thinner as the wind frisked it west, and I counted fence stobs the way a pilgrim counts beads, one per breath, one per doubt I refused to let grow teeth. Taya rode in the sling side saddle, jaw set, eyes never stopping. She had the way of reading ground like it meant to speak if you asked polite. Half a mile on, she tapped my shoulder. Hoof rings, she said, pointing to a patch where the sand held memory. 4, 1, lame. I saw it then, the drag mark in the print. The way a horse throws a foot when the shoe's riding wrong. Pike's sorrel throws like that when he's been worked mean. We turned north where the mesquite thickened and the wash split into 3 old channels. In the second channel, a bottle lay busted in glitter, and I picked a shard. It was blue glass. Pike's boys favor that cheap rye with the pretty color because it looks like the sea they'll never see. We came up on the sheep dip and found the message they'd written. A steer down to wire. Ribs showing through hide like the rungs of a ladder to nowhere. Branded with a knife over the original iron, crooked and ugly triangle within triangle, that every ranch hand would swear was Mescalero sign if you primed him with fear first. On the dirt, tracks of men who stand square to their work and leave when they're proud of it. Taya's face didn't change. When a man wishes to lie, she said softly, he uses a language other men already know. Town'll bite this bait down to the gut, I said. It's easy meat. Then we must make the harder meat taste better. I almost laughed at that short and low like a cough that forgot to die. You got a plan hidden in those bones? I have eyes, she said. And you have a name they still listen to, even when they pretend they do not. There. It's a strange pain, finding out someone believes in the coin you've spent years saying you don't carry. We moved on. At the old sheep pen, the sand told more truths. I saw the nail heads in a heel print that matched the boots of a man called Jory Vane, a boy who'd laugh while he held a brand to a calf too long because the squeal made him feel like a big man. We gathered the signs like a preacher gathers verses for a Sunday he knows will end poorly. By noon we had to choose a road. East to Mescalero Camp, risk a welcome that came on feathered shafts, or west into Needle Rock, risk a welcome that came on words shaped like knives wrapped in napkins. I looked at Taya's ankles and chose the town. Dr. Powell had a clean table and a mean sense of humor, but his hands were true, and he'd stitched my shoulder when Shiloh's lesson refused to quit bleeding. Needle Rock it is, I said. Keep your head low and your hood up. No. I will, she said, and added with a sideways look that cut me down to size. Easy, cowboy. We rode in through the freight yard where they stack the world in boxes and pretend that makes it safer. A few men looked up. One spat. One stared until his eyes watered, and he had to blink himself back into being human. I took Taya straight to Powell's back door. He opened before I knocked, as if he'd been standing there waiting for trouble to put a name to itself. Boone, he said, you smell like weather. Bring her in. He didn't say Apache or what the hell. He said, bring her in. That's why I trust him. Powell washed the rope burns clean and set to with a touch that could make a horse stop kicking. You didn't do this, he told me without looking up. No. Pike? His spelling anyway. He'll try to spell your name next. I know. Ho. We settled Taya in the back room, dosed her with willow and a little laudanum she wouldn't take without hearing twice that it was only for sleep and not for forgetting. She told Powell in simple lines, "No flowers about the cottonwood and the men who talk of clean land." Powell's jaw worked, but he saved his spit. "You can sleep here," he said. "I'll tell Mrs. Powell we've taken in a stray with teeth." I stepped out to find Marshal Wicks before Pike found us both. Wicks isn't a brave man or a coward. He's a man who measures wind and plants flags where they are least likely to blow away. I found him on the boardwalk, eyeing nailheads like he meant to arrest them. "Marshal," I said. "Boone, you heard of any mescalero raiding stock this week?" He shifted the straw in his teeth. "Heard plenty. Seen none." "Then don't buy what you haven't tasted. You got something to feed me." "Maybe." I told him about the heel prints, the bottle glass, the lame foot, the knife. Brand job uglier than sin. He listened like a man listening to rain through a roof, part interest, part doom. "You accusing Pike?" he asked finally. "I'm accusing the truth of wanting a chance." That's a big ask in a small town. I left him with that and walked to the livery where Tomas kept my second saddle stashed. On the way, I caught a piece of talk outside the Silver Ace. Pike's voice can't help but sell itself smooth as oiled leather, loud enough to be overheard by accident. He had a crowd. He had evidence, 2 scared steers, and a story dressed for Sunday. He had my name sitting on his lip like a mint he planned to savor. "And Boone?" he was saying when he saw me. He smiled slow. "Ask him yourself." "I'm here," I said. "Ask. Word is, you've been riding with an Apache girl who likes to borrow other folks' horses." Word is, you talk a lot for a man who can't spell with iron straight." The men laughed because men laugh when they don't want to choose a side yet. Pike's eyes stayed cheerful. "You got a way of making friends and enemies at the same table, Elias. I eat with whoever's hungry." He held his hands out, palms up, all benevolent. "Then you'll bring her to the marshal and let law sort it. If she's clean, she walks. And if she's not, you get your clean land," I said. He shrugged. "The land cleans itself, Boone. I just sweep." That line lit the tinder in my ribs. I've seen too much sweeping end with a grave. "I'll bring evidence," I said. "You bring your conscience, if you can find it." I felt the weight of eyes on my back all the way to Powell's. Taya was awake, ankles wrapped neat, color back in her cheeks like a dawn that meant it. Powell looked from her to me. "You stir a hornet's nest?" "I bought a hive." "Oh?" We put our heads together, the 3 of us, the doctor with his precise words, the woman with her precise silences, and me with my habit of walking into rooms I ought to leave be. Plan was simple, because simple was all we could carry. I'd ride east at first light, find the mescalero camp, and ask for 2 riders who could track truth better than I could. We'd meet Wicks at the sheep dip by noon. We'd lay out the ground's testimony and dare Pike to argue with dirt. "You think your marshal will look?" Taya asked. "He's not blind," I said. "He just likes the world dimmed. We'll turn up the lamp. And if Pike brings many men, then we bring many facts." She studied me a long time, then nodded, as if she'd just paid a price and found the goods worth it. "I will wait here," she said to Powell. "If I am gone when you return, it is because they made me leave. But I will leave a trail a child can read." "I'll be back," I said. "Count on it." "Oh." As I reached the door, her voice found me. "Elias." I turned. She touched 2 fingers to her temple, then to her heart, then to the floor. "I see you," she said. "Not your hat, not your skin you. Some words climb past every defense a man has and sit where his breath starts. Those did." Outside, the evening cooled fast. I saddled quick, took the east road, and let the bay unspool his legs. The prairie opened like a book I had tried to quit reading and failed. I rode into it anyway, because a man isn't made by the pages he loves, he's made by the ones he refuses to tear out. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. The moon came up cracked, a coin rubbed thin. I reached the hills after midnight, where the ground turns to broken plates and the juniper smells like a lost church. The desert light bled pale across the ridges, showing just enough to make a man doubt what was shadow and what was sin. My horse's breath steamed in the cold, small ghosts in a lonely chapel of wind. Mescalero signs showed careful small fires, cold camps, a respect for leaving nothing behind that a white man might pretend not to notice. The ashes were buried under sand, footsteps brushed away by cedar branches, like prayers whispered and forgotten. I studied them a while, trying to read what silence means when a people choose it. Then I dismounted at a dry spring and waited with my hat in my hands and my voice in my pocket. The air held still. Even the crickets seemed to be listening to see what kind of man I'd turn out to be. The wind brushed past, cool as the hand of something old, and far off a coyote called once and then thought better of it. Waiting is a test. It asks what you are when there's nothing left to do but sit and see if the world still has room for you. They came when they were ready, 2 riders and a runner on foot, all shadow until they weren't. Bows strung, rifles quiet but awake. The horses moved like smoke. You could tell they knew this land the way a man knows his own scars. "I'm looking for Chief Dawson's people," I said. "I have a hurt woman in Needle Rock who says she is Tea Nahazan." The runner stepped forward, breathing easy but watching every inch of me. His face didn't show anger, only the kind of calm that comes before judgment. "Taya is my cousin," he said. "If you lie, I will put an arrow where you keep your lies." "I've run out of room for lies," I said. "Come see." Ugly. He looked me over for a long moment. The stars turned once, maybe twice. Then he nodded, sharp and silent, and the tension in the air broke like thin ice. We traveled in a wedge of silence. Their horses walked single file, shadows sliding over the pale rock. Dawn met us halfway and found us unarmed in what mattered and armed in what did. The wind brought a smell of mesquite smoke and cold sage. It felt like a benediction whispered through grit. At Powell's, Taya sat straight on the cot like a queen on a low throne. The morning light touched her hair and found the copper hidden in the black. She looked small but not broken, only pared down to what couldn't be taken. When she saw the runner, her face changed without changing something unclenched, and I learned your body can smile even when your mouth refuses. They spoke quick in their tongue, words flowing like creek water, tight and bright. The runner Wolin turned to me after a while. "You found her hanging. We thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We've got to win a hearing from a man who only believes what pays him to believe." Powell's pencil stopped mid-word. He looked up from his papers and gave a small nod. "That's most of this town," he said quietly. By noon we were at the sheep dip with Marshal Wicks, Wolin, another rider named Sen, and Pike with 3 of his. The air was hard and thin, sunlight sharp enough to cut. The day felt like a coin held between 2 fingers before the flip. The ground lay before us like a witness too simple to be a liar. Every man there was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when truth is about to make someone poorer. I walked the prince slow, speaking the facts like scripture. Lame horse throwing left, heel nails on Jory Vane's boot, blue glass shard from Pike's rye, knife, brand over iron, wrong angle, wrong stroke. Each word felt heavy, anchored to the dust itself. Wicks crouched and looked, really looked, and something in his face admitted what his mouth feared to say. The dust on his fingers told him what his heart already knew. Pike laughed. "Boone, you could preach a cat into water." His men chuckled, thin and nervous. "Step where he stepped," I told Wicks. "Feel it." He did. He put his boot inside the crooked track, leaned into the weight, saw the twist where the lame leg dragged, and when he stood, the wind had a new sound in it, the quiet a crowd makes when the story they'd married starts showing its poor character. Pike's smile thinned. "You calling me a thief and a butcher?" "I'm calling you a man who loves a clean story more than a true one," I said. Wicks lifted his hand to ease the air. "Harlan, you'll come to the office. We'll talk about how your boys learned Mescalero handwriting with a knife." Pike's eyes went flat. For the first time that day, they told the truth. He glanced at Wolin, at Sen, at me. He measured the odds and the angle. He saw he could not shoot his way into innocence with this many eyes on God's own notebook. He spat and smiled again, like he'd meant to do that all along. "Of course, Marshal. Always glad to help law keep tidy." That lie slid over the ground like oil on water. The Marshal's men took the horses. Pike's crew muttered, but nobody reached for iron. You could feel something shifting underfoot, like the world had moved a half-inch closer to fair. That afternoon, Wicks took statements he never planned to take before breakfast. Powell wrote, neat and cold, and the scratch of his pen was the loudest thing in the room. Wolin spoke plain, Sen shorter, both precise. And Taya, on her feet now, a little told her piece in English that cut like a file. Not to wound, but to make a fit. Every word had weight, placed carefully, like stones on a grave that wasn't hers anymore. She spoke of rope, of fear, of waking to the wind, of seeing sky where ground should be. And when she finished, even the dust in the room seemed to settle in respect. Pike tried to smirk, but it slid off his face like grease off rain tin. Nobody looked his way. For once, he wasn't the loudest man in town. When it was done, I walked Taya to the door. The sun hung there like it had waited all day to see if we'd deserve it. The light burned gold along the eaves, catching dust motes like tiny saints. She looked out at the street, where men found other work to do than stare at us. The whole town had gone quiet in that particular way, that says it's thinking new thoughts, it doesn't yet trust. You did not have to put your name next to mine, she said softly. I didn't put it there, I said. It went by itself. She tilted her head, studying me. A faint breeze caught the ends of her braid and lifted it just enough to brush her cheek. Names cost something in this place, she said. I know, I answered. So does silence. Her eyes held mine for a heartbeat too long, like she was measuring whether I understood the price she meant. Then the small smile came, the one that makes a hard day decide to soften. Hey, she said, a note of teasing quick in her voice. Get yourself a full glass of water. Your body will thank you. Bossy, I said. Alive, she answered. The word settled between us like the last coal in a dying fire, soft, steady, still warm. Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. Your body will thank you. Needle Rock didn't change overnight. Towns never do. They just shift their weight from one foot to the other and call it walking. Pike made bail before sundown, of course. Men like him never sleep on the floor unless it's their choice. He came out smiling, hat dusted, voice polished. He didn't speak to me. He didn't have to. Men who owe you trouble write their letters in other ink. I took Taya out to my line shack for a few nights. Powell said it was safe enough, and Taya said she preferred sky she could hear. She moved careful, like a violinist testing a new string. We worked in the evenings, quiet tasks that add up to a kind of peace. Mending a halter, stacking kindling, boiling willow bark. She taught me a balm with rabbit brush and fat. I taught her how to read a cloud when it lies about rain. We traded knowing without keeping score. Talk around town got busy. Some said I'd shamed my own. Some said I'd saved the county a war. Most said nothing and hoped to live inside the gap between the two. At the Silver Ace, a slab of a man said something that started with SQ and ended without teeth. I don't like fighting. I like letting a room know I can and prefer not to. The room decided the same. 2 mornings later, a fire took old Mrs. Alder's hay shed. Taya was the first to smell the burn, and the first to see the trail coal oil dripped from a can, a fuse of rag. We put it out with wet blankets and curses, and I found the can tossed in the ditch behind Pike's foreman's house. Wicks came. He looked at the can and at the tracks and at his own hands, as if wondering when they'd learned to hold something other than excuses. By then Taya was riding true, ankles stiff but serviceable. She sat a horse like the animal had waited all its life for her hands. We took to the flats at daybreak and rode without talking, which is the kind of talking I do best. When the sun got proud and loud, we found shade and shared jerky and dried berries she carried in a pouch woven fine as patience. You ever going back to your people? I asked. I carry them, she said. I can go where my feet are. Then, after a quiet that felt like a kindness, will you ever go back to yours? I tried, I said. They weren't where I left them. She nodded like that was the only answer a country like this ever gave a man. Toward evening a rider came hard from town. Wicks, dust in his throat, apology in his hat brim. Pike's pulled a jury for the street, he said. Supper time trial at the Ace. He wants to make a speech with you as the subject. Lou. About how you and the girl burned the shed to paint him black. Taya's eyes held no surprise. He will keep sweeping until someone takes the broom. Then let's snap the handle, I said. At the Ace, Pike had gathered his men and the town's easier souls. He stood on a table like a preacher who sells salvation by the quart. He spoke of law and order and good neighbors. He spoke of fear, the way a snake speaks of shedding. He never said Apache. He said, they. He never said Boone. He said, a certain man whose pity runs farther than his sense. When he saw me at the door, he smiled like I had proven his point for him. There he is, he said, the saint of stray causes. I got tired clean through. Tired of the dance. Tired of the rope and the tree and the can of oil and the false brand and the blue glass and the way men choose ease over honor and call it prudence. I climbed up on the opposite table and let the room pick which sermon to hear. I've worked more fence than any man here, I said. I've doctored your colts and your kids when the doc was away. I bled on this floor in a fight I didn't start because a drunk thought my quiet meant I would stand still for his meanness. I'm not special, I'm just one of you, but I'll be damned if I live in a town that pretends it can't tell the difference between a woman and a warning sign. The room twitched like a horse at flybite. Men looked at their boots. A few looked at Taya and flinched from the human fact of her. Here's the thing, Harlan, I said, turning to him. You don't want clean land. You want unremembered land. You want to do what you please and never have to meet the eyes of the ones you did it to. That caught. Even his boys felt it, the way a lie starts to itch when it's been worn too long in the same spot. Wicks, to his credit, didn't hide. He stood up. Harlan Pike, he said, voice steady. You'll come with me. We've got enough to ask a judge with a higher table than yours. And just like that, the floor turned to ground again. It wasn't victory. It was the right direction. Later, under a sky that had worked hard all day and deserved its stars, Taya and I walked the short walk to the edge of town where the earth gets quiet. She looked south where the flats lie like a hymn without words. What now? She asked. Now we do the small work until it amounts to something, I said. I'll mend fences and you'll heal ankles, and we'll keep teaching things to grow that we're told not to. She laughed softly, surprise coloring it. You sound like an old man. I feel like one. I hope to be one. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. Autumn softened the edges. The grass took on a tired gold, and the Organ Mountains wore a blue made of distance and forgiveness. Pike's trial moved slow in a court 3 towns away. Needle Rock found other things to talk about: hay, babies, rain that wouldn't come, and then came in one angry sheet. The world didn't turn kinder overnight, but some men watched their words land instead of throwing them like rocks. That's a start. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. The wind stopped cutting and began to hum, like an old tune that finally remembered its words. And out here, starts are all you ever get. Taya set up a small lean-to near my line shack, not because she had to, but because being near isn't the same as being owned, and we both knew the difference mattered more than sleep. She said the ground there breathed quieter, and I didn't argue. At night her fire burned low, a steady pulse of orange through the dark, and I could tell the shape of her shadow before I saw her face. She walked the flats gathering things that cure and things that won't but try anyway. Yucca root, sage, willow bark, and some plant whose name she never told me, because it didn't have one in English. I learned to keep quiet while she listened to plants. She learned the impatience of nails when they don't want to line up with wood. We argued about the right way to braid rawhide and the right way to stew bean. We lost the arguments gladly. Losing was another kind of talking. Sometimes we rode out at daybreak to where the cottonwood stands, green tattered like a flag that has seen too many oaths. The rope was gone. Wicks took it for evidence, but the scar on the limb remained, a pale ring where bark would not forget. We would sit there and let the wind read us. It had learned our names by then, said them soft, one at a time, as if testing their weight. Some mornings it found a story of two people who had met at the hardest angle and chosen, every day since, to be gentler than the world demanded. That's not something the land forgets easily. It writes such things in dust and keeps them under its breath. In the middle of that season, a child wandered from the mescalero camp and was found by a ranch woman who had been taught all her life to fear what she didn't invite. The woman brought the boy to Taya. She stood there in my doorway, holding him like a question she didn't know how to ask. The boy's mother came at dusk, face drawn tight as a knot you tie in grief. They stood at my door, fear on one side, fear on the other, and I held my breath like the land had done that first day. The air between them felt old and breakable. Then the ranch woman said, "I kept him safe," and the mother said, "I thank you," and the two of them bowed just enough for the space to breathe again. It didn't make a newspaper because nobody writes headlines about the end of a small war, but it felt like the country got an inch wider. That's a start too. That night, the stars came early and unashamed. Coyotes sang in the low brush. I sat by my porch and watched the faint glow of Taya's fire flicker against the horizon, steady, living proof that quiet doesn't mean gone. In the stillness, I thought of how mercy grows, not like thunder or flood, but like a root under dry soil, finding its way until one day you see green again. One evening, after the kind of day that doesn't need defending, we sat with our backs to the shack and watched the world trade its colors for shadows. Taya turned the turquoise charm in her fingers, one she wore, not one given, and said, "Do you still hear the rope when the wind is wrong?" "Sometimes," I said, "but it doesn't speak the same words anymore." "What does it say?" "It asks what I'll do now, not what I failed to do then." She nodded, as if a stubborn fever had finally agreed to break. "Freedom is not a place," she said. "It is a sentence you keep choosing to finish." I looked at her and thought of all the words I'd never needed until the day I did. "Will you stay?" "I will be," she said. "Some days near you, some days near my people, all days near myself." That answer fit the land and my ribs. I felt something in me loosen that had been screwed down since boyhood, like a gate unlatched so cattle can find fresh grass without breaking a fence. We're not a story that ends with a kiss and a porch and a tame horizon. We're a story that keeps walking. Some nights we ride in opposite directions and wave our hats to the same star. Some nights we share the same fire and let silence do the warming. Call it love if you need a word. I call it honor learning to be kind. Out there, cowboy love stories get written in dust and wind, erased and written again. If you're collecting Wild West love, or you just like a Wild West love story told without the cheap paint, you'll find us somewhere between the cottonwood and the court docket, between a rope scar and a healed ankle, trying to be the people we should have been the day before. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, amen, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life.